Alex, have you been over to the Eskenazi Museum of Art recently?
I walk through there a lot, and I often forget to look around.
Well, you should stop doing that because there's an exhibition up now that gets into how the Holocaust influenced American art in the middle of the 20th century, and I talked with curator Jennifer McComas about it.
Tyler, that sounds pretty heavy.
It is. It's pretty heavy, but it's actually a really great conversation.
Cool. Okay, it sounds fascinating. And then Kate and I can fill you in on the IFell building and all the art you can find there.
Oh, that sounds great. Oh, and you know what? I went to a polo match, but without all the pesky horses.
Sounds like the perfect polo match if you don't like horses.
Yeah, so for me, the perfect polo match.
I'm Alex Chambers.
I'm Tyler Lake.
And that's all coming up on Nice Work after this.
This is Nice Work. I'm Tyler Lake. Memory is a tricky thing. Memories can be had secondhand, they can change, fade, and they can haunt. They're also part of how we cope, how we grow and find new meaning in the world. Remembrance and Renewal, American Artists in the Holocaust, 1940 to 1970, is an exhibition at the Sidney and Lois Eskenazi Museum of Art that deals with memory, with tragedy, and with the responsibility felt by survivors. I spoke with the curator of the exhibition and the curator of European and American art at the museum, Dr. Jennifer McComas. Dr. McComas, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I've been down to the museum several times to look at the exhibit, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it. So you have been clearly thinking about this for a long time. Kind of give me the timeline for when you started working on this particular exhibit and sort of coalescing the ideas that you've brought together here.
Yes, it's been quite a while. I would say that I started thinking about an exhibition of this nature around the time that the Eskenazi Museum was undergoing its renovation. So that was between 2017 and 2019. And initially I was thinking about an exhibition that might focus on refugee artists in the United States and how they use their art to kind of respond to that experience. And as I continue to think about the concept and do some reading and consider what artists I might include in the show, the concept evolved to not focus solely on the refugee experience, although some of the artists in this exhibition were refugees. But I wanted to, again, situate the exhibition more specifically in American experience, which is, of course, there are multiple American experiences, and just to kind of consider how any artists who were living in the United States at the time of World War II and afterwards look at that broader range of artistic expression. I really confirmed that concept by about 2020, and at that point I started to reach out to some other scholars in the field just to talk about the ideas, get some feedback, and I also started to do some deeper research at that point, and including looking for funding.
Tell me a little bit about the title, Remembrance and Renewal, and sort of how those themes play out throughout this catalog and the exhibition.
Yeah, so the exhibition is organized thematically into 4 sections. The 4 themes are destruction, in which artists were exploring themes of death and evil, confronting the perpetrators and commemorating victims. Another theme is that of exile, considering how the Holocaust created a refugee crisis and displaced many people, and there was also the loss of physical place, towns, structures, synagogues, all destroyed. Then the third theme of the exhibition is remember, or remembrance. And in that section, the works include studies for Holocaust memorials and other types of works that were made specifically with the idea of memory or commemoration in mind. And then finally, we turn to the subject of repair or renewal, considering how artists were thinking about healing, rebuilding, recreation after such a terrible tragedy. But I called it Remembrance and Renewal because in many ways, all of the works in the exhibition address the theme of memory in some way. Not every work is specifically a Holocaust memorial, but they all invoke the past and the memory of those who were lost. At the same time, the Jewish tradition is very much based on memory, but is also based on looking forward to the future and how we use the memory of the past and tragedies of the past to help us think about making a better future. And there is a injunction in the Torah, in fact, that we should be choosing life, even in the midst of terrible suffering, that life is still of such value. And I wanted to convey that idea in the exhibition, that even in the midst of terrible tragedy, the artists were still wanting to convey a sense of hope and survival.
You very much organized the exhibition in these 4 categories, and there are works sort of placed into each category. Are there pieces that you think, I don't mean to say are exemplary, but speak strongly to the themes of, let's start with destruction?
One of the interesting aspects of this exhibition, and I think of how American artists and even artists worldwide address the Holocaust in this mid-century period in particular, is that very few of the works actually look like they're works about the Holocaust. So we don't see works that really convey physical destruction in an explicit way. So that category of the exhibition was interesting to think about in terms of the more symbolic and metaphorical ways that artists were addressing the idea of destruction. One of the works that I find to be particularly interesting in that regard is a sculpture by Seymour Lipton. It's a lead sculpture from 1946, and it's called Moloch. Moloch is the name of a god mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. There is an idea, it's not historically accurate, but the idea in the biblical literature is that Moloch was a god that people sacrificed children to. So in that way, this god is conceived of as the epitome of evil. And so several artists used that idea and depicted this god in their work right after the war as a more symbolic way of addressing the idea of evil. What could be more evil than the murder of children? And I find it also interesting that Seymour Lipton, in his sculpture, he chose the medium of lead, which is itself a toxic medium. And compositionally, his work, it evokes the image of a monster. This figure seems to be all mouth. We have this large gaping mouth with sharp teeth or fangs. So really the idea of consumption, of devastation through this figure. So it's an abstracted form, but you can still see these animal-like features in the sculpture.
It's a lead sculpture, but to me, it actually looks very stone-like in the way it's made. It is very mid-century. It is a tangle of shapes, but there is in the top right corner what looks like an open mouth with 2 sharp fang-like teeth coming down. Kind of explain to me what the themes you see happening here with this particular piece.
Well, so I think on one level, the piece is an embodiment of evil through these very raw, kind of jagged forms. There's something about the sculpture that also strikes me as skull-like. And in that way, it references death at a more general level. So we see here almost both the perpetrator and the victim.
It feels almost like an artifact.
It does. And I would say Seymour Lipton and several other artists in this circle of emerging abstract expressionists, they were very interested in the idea of what was the world like in its primordial state. And they were trying to invoke myth in their work. So I think that we're also seeing that, Lipton is going back to an ancient text. He is focusing on one creature that's described in the text, and he's taking us back to antiquity, to a time that we might consider to be more quote-unquote barbaric, But he's also telling us, look, this just happened today in our own world.
Talk to me a little bit about exile and a piece that you found that you think really speaks to the sense of exile that you were talking about in this exhibit.
One of those works is Samuel Bach's painting called The Ghetto. What we see here is a town. At first glance, this looks like he might be documenting a town that he remembered from his childhood. But then we look more closely at this painting and we realize he actually is painting in a magic realist style. And this is not an actual place. This is more of a town of his imagination, sort of representing all of the many, many villages and towns and Jewish quarters of cities that were destroyed. And we see that this is a town that one cannot enter or exit. It's completely closed up. All of the windows are boarded up. The walls of the houses, in fact, seem to be made of gravestones. There is one opening only in this very tightly enclosed space, and it's through a Star of David shaped opening in the roof or the ceiling of the town, if you will. So that's the only way in or out, but it's not particularly accessible. An Eastern European shtetl should be located in a very lush, green, forested landscape. We see instead a very dusty, orange, rocky, sandy landscape. And in fact, to my eye, it resembles a desert, perhaps the Judean desert, which is where we find the fortress of Masada, which was an ancient Jewish fortress that was besieged by the Romans in the 1st century of the Common Era. Because the fortress was under siege and there was no way out, the 900 or so Jews who were in the fortress made a decision to commit suicide, mass suicide, rather than fall to the Romans. And suicide is not at all condoned in the Jewish tradition, which tells you how bad the situation must have been for them. We look at this painting and we think about the different connections between different moments in Jewish history and different Jewish geographies, as a diasporic culture. So I think it's a very interesting, multi-layered, complex portrayal of space and of the loss of that space and the loss and the evolution of culture.
A lot of these artists painting at this time weren't being extremely explicit about the themes of the Holocaust being present in the work. How do you think these artists were thinking about speaking to the two audiences they would have been speaking to, which is survivors of the Holocaust and people who are steeped in Jewish culture, and Americans and the wider art world that they were sort of putting these works into?
Yeah, I think that artists probably had a range of different audiences in mind, and some of these images feel much more universal in tone. Even some of the works that memorialize specific victims are still presented in a way that feels more universal, in a way that could resonate with a very broad audience. I'm thinking in particular of Chaim Gross's sculpture, which is a memorial to his sister who was murdered in the Holocaust, and her daughter as well. And he presents that sculpture in a way that visually evokes like Christian Madonna and child imagery. So I see that as a more universal representation, if only because Christian iconography is much more widely kind of recognized and identifiable in Western culture. But on the other hand, some of these artists, I believe, wanted to address the Holocaust, needed emotionally to address the Holocaust, but they didn't want their work to be necessarily identified that way by the broader audience. I think that there are several reasons. For one thing, again, we are talking about a time period when the formal qualities of one's work were given priority in art criticism. There was often little attention paid to content in the mid-20th century in the art world. And to present a work that conveys your own personal experience and personal identity too directly would quite frankly not necessarily have benefited their careers as artists. But this was still something that they felt compelled to address and perhaps wanted to be able to communicate, to a smaller audience, to those who would be able to read these deeper references or more hidden references in the work.
The next theme that you sort of put front and center is remembrance. Talk to me a little bit about that and give me an example of something that you think taps into that sense of memory, because some of this seems to be a memory for a time and place that seemed to be even before the war, a time and place that an American artist really only has a hypothetical connection to.
Right. So many of the artists in this exhibition were born in Europe in Jewish communities, but immigrated here as children. So they did have some memories of pre-war Jewish life in Europe. Others, however, were born in the United States, and some were born even during the war in the United States. So they, of course, had no direct connection or memory of life in Europe or of life even before the war. Because of this vast destruction, we see a sort of romanticization of pre-war Jewish life emerging in literature and even in scholarship in the immediate post-war era in the United States. There's a sense that the past needed not only to be salvaged and preserved, but venerated, I think. We see, for example, photographs of pre-war Jewish life circulating in a number of contexts after the war. So these were photographs that were taken in Europe prior to the war for different purposes. And some of the images, particularly those that focus on more traditionally observant lifestyles, religious lifestyles, those seem to gain some prominence in some of the books and exhibitions that featured them after the war. And so some artists started to look at those photographs as well and to use them as sources of inspiration in their own work and in their own thinking about pre-war Jewish life, maybe the lifestyle that they imagined that their ancestors had lived. So one of those artists is Ruth Weisberg, who was born in Chicago in 1942 and currently lives in Los Angeles. She was interested in learning more about her own family's Jewish past, and she went through thousands and thousands of pre-war photographs, conducting research, and she selected some of the photographs to use as inspirations for a 1971 portfolio called The Shtetl, A Journey and a Memorial. It's a portfolio of 9 intaglio prints. Several of them, at least, are directly based on pre-war photographic compositions. She's made some very interesting changes to the compositions. For example, in an image of a street in Krakow, Poland, the photograph that she was looking at includes 3 figures walking in the street. In her 1971 version of the composition in her printmaking media, she removes 2 of those figures as if to convey the loss of the population and the loss of really the life happening in the Jewish quarter of Krakow. They remain extremely powerful for us today.
Many of the artists in this exhibit didn't experience the horrors of the war or the Holocaust firsthand. They were secondary witnesses. So how do you see that remove reflected in their work?
Right. And just to define secondary witness, so what that term refers to are people who either lived through an event but were in a different place geographically. Also, it can refer to the descendants, in this case of Holocaust survivors, who might experience generational trauma or hear stories from their family members. I think that one way that we see a bit of a sense of remove in these works is through the very fact that these artists were not making representational images documenting the Holocaust. They didn't witness the concentration camps themselves, although a couple of these artists were in the army or were working as journalists and did witness concentration camps during their liberation. But for the most part, these artists did not see the atrocities as they were happening. In fact, there were few, if any, images of those atrocities available prior to the end of the war. We see also some artists turning to art historical models for ideas about how to convey, how to illustrate atrocity, through the art historical tradition, or perhaps turning to abstraction, and again, thinking about the devastation through a more metaphorical or symbolic angle. It's not until probably the 60s or so that artists even start to turn to some of the well-known photographs of, say, the Warsaw Ghetto and use them in their work. We do see that in more contemporary representations of the Holocaust, but not so much in this initial period.
It strikes me that a lot of the work of remembrance and renewal fell to the Jewish communities living in the United States. Genocide meant Europe was no longer sort of the beating heart of the Jewish world, and many of these artists in the U.S. had rather suddenly found themselves bearing the burden of culture and memory. And I'm curious, as you've gone through this, how you think about how they handled this very sudden responsibility.
That was very much on the minds of many cultural and religious figures in the Jewish community. During the war and in its aftermath, there was a realization that suddenly the American Jewish community was the largest Jewish community in the world. And there was a feeling of monumental responsibility. So the journal Commentary was founded after the war, and it's just kind of a Jewish cultural journal. And its editor, I'm paraphrasing here, but the editor wrote in the introduction that, well, now it's really our job here in the U.S. to continue Jewish culture. And there were concerns that there wasn't enough knowledge among the American Jewish community to successfully undertake that task. There were a number of refugee rabbis, for example, who came to the U.S., one of whom was Abraham Joshua Heschel, who later became very active in the civil rights movement. Some of his texts greatly romanticize the pre-war Jewish past in an attempt, I would say, to inspire American Jewish readers to embrace their traditions, to renew those traditions. Again, this emphasis on renewal. We also see in this period there are demographic shifts in the Jewish community, with more people moving to suburban neighborhoods, for example. There's really a compelling sense that they need a Jewish space in these new neighborhoods. So we see a lot of new synagogues being built, which serve as kind of community centers as well, and places where a kind of modern Jewish culture, but also one rooted in the past, can be developed and can be maintained.
You sort of note that maybe one of the reasons these visual pieces became so vital in the larger narrative was around this time there was a decline of traditional textual literacy among the American Jewish population, and illustrations and paintings and photographs took on the role of traditional texts may have occupied in previous generations. Can you kind of explain how you think that sort of happened, the loss of the textual literacy, and then how these images kind of came to fill in that void?
Right. So I think that the unique circumstances of American culture did influenced some changes in how American Jews practiced Judaism when they arrived in this country. And some immigrants were actually very happy to take on a more secular, assimilated lifestyle. And in other cases, it was just all of the pressures and challenges of adapting to life in a new country that had to be the priority. There was some loss in general of some of the traditional textual literacy, by which I mean knowledge of Hebrew, ability to read some texts like the Talmud in the original language and to study it. I'm really overgeneralizing because that's by no means the case for everyone. But that was also a perception, maybe even more so than reality. It was a perception at the time. the visual art was actually becoming more and more important within Jewish culture already before this period. And in late 19th century Europe, for example, we do see more and more Jews becoming artists, like in the modernist sense, of being a painter, a sculptor, not necessarily working with religious subject matter, although sometimes. We see some really innovative, interesting modernist Jewish art being produced in Europe prior to World War I. The same thing is happening in the United States, and some of the Jewish immigrants are going to art school, traveling to Paris to learn about modern art. So there's already this interest in art and how can Jewish identity be expressed through the visual arts. So there's just an interest in alternative and new ways of expressing identity and expressing responses to the modern world, which we see, not just among the Jewish population, of course, but more broadly.
To me, this feels like the exhibition that one needs to most closely read the titles of the pieces. Is that something that you would emphasize to folks visiting?
I would. I've been telling some tour groups that I've led through the space that the titles are very important. And not just the titles, but we need to know something about, for the most part, we need to know about these artists' biographies. We need to know where they came from, where were they living, what was the context around their work. And, so I would say not just the titles, but reading the labels will give visitors to the exhibition more insight. Now, you can certainly appreciate these works on their own right. They're beautiful. It's kind of strange to say works about the Holocaust are beautiful, but these are beautiful works of art, aesthetically, formally. So one can certainly appreciate them simply from that perspective. But to understand how they also intersect with the Holocaust, how that may be one of the meanings we can read into them, then I would encourage visitors to take a look at the labels and or to read the catalog.
You did a lot of research putting this together. Tell me something as you unearthed all this that really surprised you and got you excited as you were telling this story.
I was very struck by the way pre-war photographs were used in memorial contexts and how they inspired the work of other artists. That wasn't something I had been as familiar with. I mean, so we see this with Frank Stella and also the Ruth Weisberg pieces that I mentioned. There are several others. This use of photography and the way that meaning was transformed over time, that was a revelation to me. It was obviously somewhat of an emotionally difficult project to undertake. And there were some, particularly when I was writing the catalog, there were some days when I thought, well, I can't write anymore today. I'm done. That's enough. So there was that sense of heaviness, of sadness that I felt working on the project. But at the same time, the fact that artists were making, frankly, beautiful and innovative works of art in the face of this terrible catastrophe, and the fact that some of these works, many of them, incorporate themes of hope and persistence, that was so inspiring to me. And it really made me think about the ways that we can turn to art, to express what is best about humanity, and the ways that art can serve therapeutic functions. These are issues that we don't often talk about in the field of art history or in the museum. We're so focused on the style and the movement. And I think it's really important to revisit modern art in particular through these other lenses about what does art mean for us as humans. In fact, why is it that humans have been making art almost longer than engaging in any other activity? I just hope that visitors to the exhibition will also feel a sense of, I think, maybe a sense of inspiration. Following up on my last comments, I hope that visitors will come away feeling feeling some renewal of hope in humanity. We're living through such challenging times right now. And I hope that through visiting an exhibition that addresses an extremely challenging moment in our, frankly, very recent history, I hope that we can find some sense of hope for the times that we're currently living in.
Dr. Jennifer McComas, thanks so much for coming in. I learned a lot talking to you, but I also learned a lot from going and visiting the exhibit itself, which I encourage everyone to do. Remembrance and Renewal, American Artists and the Holocaust will be up at the Sidney and Lois Eskenazi Museum of Art through December 14th. This is Nice Work. I'm Tyler Lake.
This is Nice Work. I'm Kate Young.
And I'm Alex Chambers. And we're here today to talk about the IFell.
The IFell is a building, first of all.
It's on the corner of 4th and Rogers here in Bloomington.
And it's a historic building that used to be...
Something to do with cars.
Yes. And we'll learn more about that in a minute.
We'll make sure to.
Yes, we have Angela Caldwell with us today. But first, I just wanted to kind of set the scene for what the space is like.
So you walk up to the building, and it's a yellow brick building with these big garage doors and then a few smaller sort of regular doors as well. Through one of the big windows, you can see into this big gallery space, which we'll describe in a minute. You'll see a guitar shop.
A bakery on the corner.
A bakery on the corner, Rainbow Bakery. Right. So walk us through the door, Kate.
So you enter the space, the main gallery space, and it's a huge, it really has that industrial feel. You've got concrete floors, you've got kind of exposed trusses on the ceiling.
Also a bunch of ventilation ductwork.
Ventilation and ductwork is all visible, and it just has kind of a rough, artsy, urban kind of feel to it, which is a little surprising in Bloomington. There just aren't a lot of spaces like that. It's finished enough that the walls are white and you can display artwork,
right?
But it also still has this kind of rough, unfinished look to it as well, and feel.
There are also some doors that go into small studios all around the space.
Exactly.
As well.
So it's a gallery surrounded by artist studios, which is really beautiful.
It is.
Now that we've set the stage,
let's learn about the actual business of the IFell, or the organization that lives inside the building.
And to help us understand that, we have Angela Caldwell.
Angela, thanks for being with us today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
We've invited you to talk with us about your role in the community art space and to learn about the history of the building and just what you have going on at the gallery. So let's start with the basics. What is the IFell, and what is up with that name?
The IFell is a very old building. I think it's from the 30s, although Cynthia Brubaker, I have to give her all the credit. She is a historical preservationist, and she had eyes on the building many years ago. I've been in Bloomington. It'll be 13 years this fall. And as I was coming to Bloomington, she had just taken possession of the building with Daniel, a local ceramicist, and their intent was to have primarily a community ceramic studio, an educational center, as well as studio space to help pay the rent. Through a lot of iterations, it has become what it is now. Daniel is no longer part of the building. I have stepped in. I ran a similar space in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and was integral in starting their community art neighborhood. And so I had lots of ideas and experience and just helped Cindy. We started thinking about utilizing the common space. So in the perimeter of the building, we have 12 studio spaces that are privately rented from working artists. Some have their businesses in their space. Some are part-time artists. Some share. That was the original intent of the building, is to have community artists space, and that continues to be...
Like studios.
Studios.
Yeah.
Yes, working studios. And that continues to be one of our primary focuses. And to keep rents low and affordable, we realized that we had all this big unused space.
Right,
so
it's a big space.
It's a very big space. And when I tell people what I do, and this is all on a volunteer basis, they think I'm crazy. We have 3 rotating shows every month. So Cindy and I, sit down and plan 3 exhibitions every month on top of private space rentals. We've had beautiful wedding receptions. We've had fundraisers for politicians. We've had the punk scene was real integral for a while, playing music. They still have shows, which has really been exciting just to see how the building has become a real central part of especially that corner, but also as Bloomington at large. It's really a favorite place to hang out.
Yeah, to me, it really does feel like an artist community, and it feels like a community space. I've been to poetry readings there. I've been to experimental art shows. I've been to Zine Fest. I mean, just so many different
Cicada
things.
Cinema uses us. Yeah.
Buffy Prom.
Buffy Prom.
What was the building originally?
I believe a car dealership. So that's why it has the big bays. That's why it has the big garage doors. At one point, I think there was even a gas station on the side because there seemed to be some tanks or something that had to be removed. So it's been...
over on the Rainbow Bakery side?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Huh.
Yeah,
Okay.
Rainbow Bakery, they're a real anchor for us also at the space. They're part of the IFell building.
Okay, that's good to be clear. So so there's also food.
Food.
Yeah. Everything.
Good food.
Everything you need, really.
Exactly.
And coffee.
Yes. Exactly.
We were sort of losing one of what was considered the pop-up gallery, and that will become a retail space. One of our artists used to run a local gallery in town and is now starting their own gallery. So it will be very exciting. Many local artists will have their work represented in his space. David Sloma, who is opening this business, it will be called the IFell Art Market, fully open in October, right in time for the holidays. Somebody wants to see the exhibition, it will be now available 5 to 6 days a week, which is really exciting.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems huge.
Yeah.
So you mentioned First Fridays. Can you tell us what First Fridays is and how it plays into the IFell?
There's a local organization called the Gallery Walk. You can be a member of Gallery Walk. It's a paid membership where they have a website and they promote all exhibitions going on in Bloomington. So now we are formally a member of Gallery Walk, and it takes place on the first Friday of every month. Some are rotating shows, as we do every month. You'll see new exhibits. It's just a walkable gallery experience, very social, enlightening, educational event. It's free to the public for people to come out and experience art.
And that is where you open your monthly exhibits.
Yes. That is
at First Fridays.
Yes. New exhibitions, that is the reveal, I guess you'll say, on First Friday.
Can you talk a little bit about your curatorial vision or how it is that you select artists for these shows?
We usually do a call out in the late fall, first of the year, and mid-year for anybody who wants to propose an exhibition. Cindy and I sit down, we look at who has submitted work, what the quality of the work is. Some might be more entry-level, newer art. We want to show everybody's work in the best light. So we work with even new artists on how they might more professionally hang their show, how to more professionally represent their show, how to write an artist statement. Do they want to title their exhibitions? Some people know exactly what they want to do. We don't step on anybody's feet. It's a sort of what you envision for each show.
It sounds like you're mentoring.
I try to
artists.
when necessary or when they ask, sure.
Another regular thing that you do is a holiday show?
I came up with the idea to have a ceramic sale. Thought that's a gift giving. I became familiar with ceramic artists in Bloomington, and I thought that might be a good fit. I think we've done 3 so far, and we plan to do it again this December. It's been a real big hit.
The ceramic show is really lovely because it feels much more like an exhibit than a market.
Yes, it's a little of
And
both,
yet-
actually. Mhm.
Yeah.
And yet, because it's the holidays and the items are for sale, you kind of have that gift giving. But it's also just like a really beautiful showcase for
Yeah,
the
it is.
artists.
There's a lot of talented ceramicists in the area.
I just wanted to say that about 4th and Rogers. It just feels like the IFell, because it's a venue and it's a exhibit space and it's a place where artists are working, making art.
Yeah.
That it really does have an artist community feel to it, and it also feels very welcoming. And I think it has grounded that corner. And
we're very proud of that.
And it's just something that I think every community needs, and it's so great to have that here now.
Yeah, we really know that the Fell holds a really wonderful place in people's hearts because, believe me, when 8 o'clock comes around on a first Friday, I'm beat and I have to kick people out of the building. Nobody wants to leave.
Yeah, it's such a great place to be.
Thank you so much, Angela, for coming and talking to us.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
More nice work after the break.
So, Tyler, you live over near Building Trades Park, right? That's how you found out about this next story.
Yeah, I can sometimes hear what's going on down there. It's literally sort of just down the alley from me, and it's true that voices carry.
So you heard this thing before you saw it?
I did. And what I heard sounded like people playing 3 different sports at once. There was the kind of chatter you would hear on a basketball court. You know, I'm open, over here, great pass, that kind of stuff. And then you would hear bike tires, like squeaking and sliding. And then the last thing was this high-pitched sort of smacking sound. It was like somebody hitting a wiffle ball with one of those hollow plastic bats for kids.
So weird. So what did you think it was?
I could not make heads or tails of it, but I was intrigued. I wanted to know.
So you went and checked it out right away?
Well, I actually got busy with other stuff and totally forgot about it for a bit.
Super intrigued.
Yeah, very actually, but also easily distracted. But I did manage to get down there, and I'd never heard of bike polo, which is what it was. But once you see it, you see these people like riding around on a court with these long, skinny mallets in one hand. And it's funny how like there's no question what you're looking at. It's people on bikes playing polo. It pretty much has to be bike polo.
3, 2, 1, go!
Does it actually matter how something gets started?
It actually started with, I do this because of my friends. And it started with Scott over there. Scott saw something on social media. I think it was Reddit. He saw an example of a rotor guard.
Which is sort of a horseshoe-like piece of metal. It's meant to keep the brakes from getting roughed up.
And it looked really cool. Like someone had custom fabricated it and was like, well, what's that? And maybe Peeler or John said, that's bike polo. And Scott was like, let's try it out.
That's Vinny Beyer. Scott is Scott Coffin. Vinny, Scott, Peeler, and John all volunteer at the Bloomington Bike Project. That's where Bloomington Bike Polo was born.
I bought some poplar dowels and some PVC pipe and some screws and some bolts. There's some nuts and some bolts, and put together some very crappy mallets.
The game's pretty simple. 4 people on each team. At the end of each court are little kid-sized hockey goals. You try to hit a small rubber ball into your opponent's goal with a long mallet while riding a bike. It's even harder than it sounds, which is probably why everyone's so supportive.
Yeah, buddy.
I couldn't help but notice when Vinny told me how the club started, he stopped to make a quick note.
I do this because of my friends.
I think that's true of a lot of hobbies. This particular group seems more aware, or maybe just more vocal about it than most.
At least for me, it's, a way of being more like face-to-face with people and share an experience, an appreciation for sport. As passionate as people are about it, it really is about having fun.
Oh, yeah.
They've been at this for several years now. Certainly seems like a bona fide little community they have here. They've traveled to tournaments, even hosted one recently. The Tenderloin Classic, they called it. They held it at an ice rink. Apparently, they are great places for bike polo, once they've thawed out.
Oh, yeah.
They come out here to this park, most of them, twice a week. They build an elaborate little border to create a court. It has dozens of pieces. They build it up and tear it down every time they play. They've made it out of wood planks connected by brackets and pins. It's very DIY. They build it all, the bikes, the goals, the court itself. It's not a turnkey hobby. It's more like building a toy out of Legos and playing with it, instead of pulling an action figure out of a box. Even after you've built it, it's not an easy sport. Riding a bike with one hand, holding a mallet with the other, trying not to run into another rider. Just touching the ball is deceptively difficult.
Good pressure. Pull wide.
It all feels like some kind of labor of love. Maybe that's why it's so kind. They're so kind. Kind to one another. Even kinder to newcomers. Sam Stewart's first game was like that.
The appeal for me was just how nice everybody was. A lot of sports, kind of the reason that I never joined was because it was so competitive. It was like, okay, you're playing soccer, now you gotta get a goal or we're gonna shame you or whatever. But once I came and joined this group, it was like, hey, you touched the ball. Good job. And it just really feels welcoming.
That's a good job, Sam.
Sam will be back next week. You can come too. Anyone can. They are going to build it. It's up to you whether or not you want to come.
Love this, Tyler. Love bike polo. And you can come too, huh? Anyone can just come?
You can show up. Chances are they will definitely have a couple of spare bicycles, a couple of spare mallets, maybe even a spare helmet. The only reason I didn't play when I was there, I wanted knee pads and elbow pads. And I feel like I should bring those. I don't feel like I should be wearing anyone else's elbow pads or knee pads.
Were they wearing knee pads and elbow pads?
Some were. You could tell some of them were just so skilled on a bike that they probably should be, but they weren't. But they were all wearing helmets. There was no question about that.
Okay. Yeah. You said in the story that they build the bikes too.
Yeah, a lot of the folks there are in the sort of the orbit of the bike project, which if you've ever been down there...
The Bloomington Bike Project.
The Bloomington Bike Project, yeah. If you need help with your bike, you can go there, you can get help for free, you can learn how to work on your bike. And so it doesn't surprise me in the least bit that these guys, these folks, it is mostly guys, I'm going to be honest, that these guys came from that space because they do make a lot of the things themselves. They assemble the bikes themselves. They made the mallets themselves. And I think all of that is absolutely a byproduct of being in this environment where doing it yourself is expected.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about many sports that have a building component to it.
Where you actually make the equipment.
Where you have to make the equipment. And you end up having, I think because you make the equipment, you end up having a relationship with the equipment that's different than purchasing a racket or a ball or using a basketball goal that was already there.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. That's amazing. Speaking of sports, when we were conceiving of Nice Work, I feel like we decided we weren't going to have any sports on here, Tyler.
Yeah, and this was one of my first pitches.
It was.
So I've been thinking about that a lot. Why do I distinguish this from any other sport?
Yeah.
And I do think that is part of it. The fact that they build it all themselves makes it a craft at the very least.
Right.
Well, actually, can I ask you though?
Yeah, sure.
We had all kind of agreed that there's plenty of sports coverage. That's why we're not
going
to do sports coverage. And then I came to you with this thing about a sport.
Yeah.
And you said yes.
Very quickly. I think it's not a sport that is institutionally supported. I mean, it's not just the DIY. Yeah, like you talked about the DIY thing. To me, what does seem different about bike polo, and we should credit Leo Pies, our producer, who's in the studio, for helping to point this out just now, is that one of the distinctions with something like bike polo, the more marginal the sport gets, the less likely there is to be this sense of competition, not just in the game, but you're developing your skills and you're trying to professionalize maybe, or you're really trying to count your stats and all that stuff. With bike polo, it seems like, and this comes through in the piece, but with bike polo, it seems like it's really about getting together with friends.
It does. It's the profit motive is non-existent.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that makes it arts and culture, it's that there's not much money to be made in it.
I think that ultimately is the criteria. You're not going to make money off of this.
No.
And therefore, it's a good subject for Nice Work.
I think we're probably going to keep doing stories about things that you can't make a lot of money on.
There's more stuff you can't make money on our next episode.
I'm Tyler Lake.
And I'm Alex Chambers, and this is Nice Work.
Nice Work is a production of WFIU, WTIU, and Indiana Public Media. You can find us at ipm.org.
This episode was produced and edited by Tyler Lake. We get production help from Danny William, Holly Wilkerson, Carl Templeton, Eddie Stewart, Leo Pies, Jillian Blackburn, and Jonah Ballard.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Alan Davis. Additional music from Universal Production Music. The executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Nice work, Tyler.
Nice work, Alex.